Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. Give it a few more minutes, see, let people have a chance to join, and then we'll get going promptly on the hour. Maybe a minute or two afterwards. It's very hot in the UK today, so I'd imagine lots of people have decided not to bother because well, in here it's 32 degrees, which is about 88 Fahrenheit. And we don't have air conditioning for the most part, so this is how we roll. Wait just a few more minutes while people join. In the meantime, where's everyone tuning in from? It's about 6 p.m. local time here, so I'm interested in the audience. Oh, UK, nice. You must be in pain just like the rest of us today then. Boulder, Colorado, nice. Okay, so the format of this is going to be we're going to talk to you about identity security, why it became important, and I'll do some intros. Well, I'll introduce myself in just a second. We're going to do the slides. There's going to be a bit of time for Q&A, and then if you want to ask either general cybersecurity questions, we can do that, or if you want to talk about Enforcer, we can also do that as well. So you can also ask questions throughout in the chat, and I'll do my best to respond to them as we go. Session runtime should be between 30 and 40 minutes. Depends how much I ramble, I guess. Okay, I'll give it one more minute and then we'll get going. This call is being recorded as well, so if you need to view it later on, then you can do. Okay, welcome in everyone. Let's get started. So to give an intro to myself, my name's Lewis. I work at Enforcer. This is my 1 year anniversary actually this week. I've come from an MSP background. I've worked in 3 MSPs. I tried to have my own for a little while. I realized that was actually really difficult and it wasn't much fun running a business. So I decided to get back into the tech and thought I'd give it a go at a vendor, which I'm very much enjoying. My focus and specialism really is in Microsoft security, whether it be Intune primarily. That's where my MVP award is for. I'm also very interested in Defender for Endpoint and Entra. So today we're going to talk about how identity became the most important cybersecurity control. When we were looking at this, and when Enforcer started to look into making a TDR solution, when you follow the path of how security got to where it did today, it kind of makes sense why this space is really important right now. It didn't happen by accident. The whole identity thing, it is not an accident. And you might have seen the phrase that identity is the new perimeter. Well, I like to say that it's the not so new perimeter because really a login has been the way that you would gain access to something for quite some time. But there's lots of things you can do to protect it. Let's go on a bit of a journey and look at what cybersecurity actually is and where it came from. Because once you have this context, it then paints a picture as to why identity is really, really important. So I haven't gone down every single rabbit hole here, but I think that the overview will kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So, and I haven't gone back to the time where computers were the size of refrigerators and they were being wheeled into big buildings and it was, a kilobyte of data. We're not going back that far. But let's take it back to, say, the mid 80s, a great time for music and also a good time for cybersecurity to get going. And let's look at the endpoint. So typically when cybersecurity started to become a thing, the main focus was really on the endpoint. And so if we look back to what an early computer virus looked like, it would be a threat actor, even though that term probably wasn't even coined back then, creating something on a floppy disk and then manually distributing that to machines. So they would go around to the machines, maybe they would leave it in a library, and then someone would pick that up, put it into their machine, and then that's how it would spread. That you always hear that, never pick up a USB stick from the car park and put it in a machine. It's kind of the same thing, but it was floppy disks. And so that really was cybersecurity for the most part. And there needed to be some way at some point for the market to create a product to protect from that. So how did you detect them? Well, introduce this guy who you might have seen before. If this picture doesn't do enough justice, then maybe this one will. And I've blurred the cigarette in case children are watching. Of course, we are talking about John McAfee. Not sure what he's holding there. Maybe it's a mop, but again, I've blurred it for the protection of the children watching. John McAfee, fun guy. You should go and look at his history. But he was one of the first big names in the cybersecurity space, especially when it came to endpoint protection. And the products he made were things like McAfee Virus Scan. I'll be honest, I'm not really old enough to know what this is, but thankfully we've got the internet and I can go back in time to work out how this stuff used to function. So on your endpoint, you would go out and buy a piece of software like this, probably more on the floppy disk in the early days, and then we would look at how this stuff worked. So it would be signature based. Every file on a machine has a hardware hash, and so you can correlate those hashes to signatures, and then essentially this CD you bought, you would load onto your machine. It would have a known list of all the bad signatures, and then when you inserted the bad disk, it would match those signatures to the malware. The animation is not quite working on this slide, but imagine that flags as the Trojan horse there. Things evolved into things like behaviors. So whilst we still have signature detection today, it then moves on to behavior. So what does a threat actor do that looks bad? So it might be modifying system files, deleting files or a number of files in a short amount of time, modifying system files or something like that. But that wasn't perfect because what happens if your software vendor is the one that provides that script? So if you had a really old accounting system and it said to clean up the database, you need to delete all these files in one go, it might have flagged that as malware when it actually wasn't. So it was never perfect, but it was just the way that things started. And then if we fast forward some time, we then move to the mid 1990s to 2005. It's a great time to be born. Ask me how I know. And most company networks looked a bit like this. So you've got a network where the whole thing to protect is now not just a computer, but you've got servers that host applications, email, you've got printers, files, but it's the IT admin's job is all still in one building. And then the way out of that network is just through the router. So the protection moved from one machine to serve as a network and an infrastructure. And email security, I wanted to point out, is very much the same thing. Now we have cloud delivered protection. We have inline detection. We have API detection based on mailboxes that are all stored in cloud services. It's very easy to set up, and you don't need that much knowledge. Back in the day, you had to know how to do Exchange server, or so I think Domino, I think was one of the really old ones. Again, it's where my knowledge kind of tapers off because I wasn't old enough to see it. So with the focus on network security, what would we do? We would put a firewall in the middle of the stuff inside the building and the stuff that's on the internet. And so as a cybersecurity admin, I would only really be focused on what's in the building. I turn up to work, I do my job, I leave the building, and as soon as I lock that door, that is kind of the security job done. Firewalls, in a simple sense, will let you see the traffic that's going in and out of the network and then decide what to do with it. And so they work on a rule-based system. Quite often they're hierarchical, so the rule at the top will have more influence than the rules at the bottom. Unlike conditional access policies and Entra ID, sometimes I do see that mistake being made. And so you could say that, so in this instance, if the internet is sending traffic to the internal network and it's a remote login, I'd like to block that because that's port 23 for telnet. We need to block that. And so you could make these rules. Now, this still exists today. So if you've got firewalls or next-gen firewalls, ultimately the action's still the same. It's still a list of things that is allowed and not allowed. And then you can buy services that do packet inspection to work out where the traffic's going. And that's typically what people see in next-gen firewalls. Still around today, but less important now as we'll move on to, because devices roam and people roam and all the requirements are different. Sticking to the theme of seeing who the market players were, you've got Checkpoint, who made Firewall 1 in 1993. Cisco, who made Pix Firewall, or PIX. And then NextScreen, who were later acquired by Juniper. But this, again, if we're looking at what was being bought by an IT admin, we've got antivirus software, and then we've got firewalls and that kind of hardware. And so a lot of security was still stuff you could see. It was something in the server room, it was something on the machine. I can still do these things. What did working from home look like? Well, not much. You might have had an early XP machine or Windows 2000 machine, and just to get on the internet, you'd have to sideload a network card. And even after you've gone off through all the effort of doing that, the only thing you've really presented with is Google and a few of the other sites, because there weren't many companies, especially SMBs, that had access to allow people to work from home. It would be very locked down environments, very expensive. End result was not good. So your option for working from home was either be in the office or you don't have a job if it involved a computer. The other alternative, I guess, was to use things like the briefcase feature back in Windows, where you could load up a file on the machine, copy it to your local machine, take it away, work on it, bring it back to the office, and the briefcase would do some sort of sync back to the server. So they were different times. Like we didn't socialize on the internet. We actually went out and did real things. Some examples of that were we go to Wigan Pier, very UK reference if you understand that one. We went to the pub and we went exercising at the gym. Like we actually did things as people, and we didn't have things like TikTok because instead we were touching grass, as the kids say. Then we went hybrid, 2005 to 2015. This is I got into IT in the tail end of when was it? November 2016 when I got into it. So some of you might go, oh, he got in late, but that's just where we were, and we had a hybrid setup. This is very much how I started, so it all feels quite familiar to me. At some point, the internet got good enough to work from home, and so what you started to see were companies. Now we've got this office building, and we've got the firewall, and we've got all the apps and servers in this concrete box as the office. But now the internet's good enough, we can do things like VPNs. So you would see people setting up things like PPTP VPNs that require a username and a password and an IP address, and you're connected and you can work from home. Again, often it required complex pieces of software to set up, but for people that needed it, that's how you might do it. You might have seen the internet being used less to facilitate working from home, but more to facilitate networks and satellite offices working together as one big international org. So again, the attack surface is changing somewhat. And for those who aren't fully aware, a VPN will just connect to private networks over the public internet. So I can use my home computer to connect to a company server over hopefully an encrypted tunnel. Although when it started, it wasn't encrypted, but it wasn't a big enough attack surface for people to monetize and protect at that time. A threat actor, therefore, might start to try and compromise that VPN. So if I'm at home or the satellite office, my way out to the internet is a router, go over the internet, and I'm going back to another router where the servers are. That is hopefully encrypted. The bad actor is trying to get in through those routes. And I mean, I remember some of the systems I used to work on. There might have been a slightly horrendous practice of people just sharing company VPN details. So the admin, because cybersecurity wasn't front of mind, would just set up the company VPN and share the creds. I don't know if any of you can relate to that in the chat, but that is commonly how it used to be, especially in small business. So if I was the threat actor and I had these three details, the IP, username, and password, I could get into your company network, and it might be hard to detect that I'm actually in there. Again, looking at the market, you had people like Cisco, Checkpoint, and Fortinet protecting VPNs. There are other vendors available. And then there was also the Microsoft way of doing VPNs, which you would do the RAS server, if you remember that, routing remote access. And I also remember that time when Apple kind of led the charge on trying to get people to use IPsec, and so we had to do all this conversion from PPTP to IPsec so that the connections were actually encrypted. So it is moving on, but as you can see, we've moved from direct endpoint security to network security, and then it changed again, where from 2015 to now, everything is everywhere. This was sparked by really two things. The first thing you'll be very familiar with, which was the pandemic, but slightly before then, we had messages from big cloud to put it in the cloud. And so you had the run and the tail end of Steve Ballmer at Microsoft in 2014, who wasn't the biggest advocate of the cloud. Wasn't the biggest advocate of things like the iPhone either. He didn't think it would work, and he didn't actually believe in the Xbox. And then Satya came in and said, okay, we are putting stuff in the cloud. So what does that look like, and what did we do? Well, we put it in the cloud. And now the modern network looks more like this than any of those other pictures we saw. And so you might still have satellite offices, or you might even still have VPNs that go off to other public clouds. But typically, for most businesses who have sort of embraced that cloud native experience, this is what it looks like, where we've got emails exchanged online. Hopefully, that's where you all are. You've got XDR services being provided by cloud providers, like all the cloud behavioral detection by Defender for Endpoint and Defender for XDR is all cloud native. They've got all their threat detections and threat intel in their cloud service, and every time a file goes in and out of the device, it's being scanned against local signatures still. But if it needs investigation, it will actually ship that off to the cloud and do the remediation based on the latest signatures and virus packages. We got SharePoint as well. SharePoint took off massively during COVID because it was a well, we like to call it an unscheduled cloud migration. Everyone was sent home. It must be put to the cloud so that we can work from it. And a lot of the pain today of SharePoint is still felt by the very fact that it was done so quickly. Point is, workload in the cloud. And then financially, for Microsoft, if we look at this graph, the number went up in quite a big way, and they now have something like $80 billion of fiscal revenue just in Azure services, which obviously makes Microsoft very happy. When you break down what that means for us as service providers, I say us like I'm still an MSP, the responsibility shifted somewhat, and you would have seen this graph if you've done Microsoft exams or looked at any sort of cloud provider website, where today, because we're predominantly SaaS, it means that the apps and the identity are the only thing that we need to manage or partially manage. And all this stuff to the left of that is no longer our problem. So if I'm using Exchange Online, I don't care really about the physical security of Microsoft data centers. I don't have to worry about the host infrastructure or the power or the cooling or the backup or the RAID or anything like that. Network's not my problem. The OS Exchange Online is actually just running Exchange, but it's not my problem. And that's the best version of Exchange. Apps, it's an online thing. Yes, you can hook local desktop apps into it, but that's not really what that means. And then really the only bit I'm interested in now is identity and access and the configuration of the SaaS platform. And so when we look at that in a bigger picture, it means that identity is the weak spot because all my stuff is now in the cloud and my access to said stuff is with a laptop and an identity and a username and a password. And so this has been the point that lots of cyber companies over the last couple of years or so have really been pushing on. And really one of the bigger ones has been Microsoft, because they've been saying that in their digital defense reports for 2025 and 2024, I'll save you the reading. It's about 120 pages combined that says turn on MFA. And then the later version is maybe turn on passwordless. But so much of the market is not currently at the MFA point that they have to keep saying this message. The stats around how many global admins still don't have MFA are pretty shocking. I think it's about 40% or something. It's in the latest report. You can go and have a look at it. But that's how we do it. And you might have seen that slightly cringe phrase that people say now that hackers don't hack, they log in. It is unfortunately true. The other risk profile we need to worry about is that the reconnaissance and the data collection about these companies is actually easier to do now. So yes, I could look up someone's domain before and find out their IP address, but because everyone's sharing public cloud services now, something like, so if I look at Costco, for example, great shop, great perks, great membership, not a sponsor, I can find out they're using Proofpoint. And so if I know there's a vulnerability in Proofpoint, I can then target that. The other thing I could do on these companies is do things like looking at the certificates. So somebody, I've misanimated this, but somebody on a Linux laptop, which is usually the case, can go and look at their certificates, go and look at what those services are, and then try to exploit them. And it's really easy just to do this publicly now, whereas before you might have known what their office IP address is, but all the apps sitting behind that may not have been public because they were used by people who were actually in the office. So to facilitate remote working, we've made everything open and public and accessible, which means the risk if somebody breaks the identity is even greater. And so another way of saying that is identity is the gate to your castle in the cloud, because that's essentially what we've built over the last couple of years or so, and it gets more and more people are getting pushed in that direction. How many times have you recommended to customers that they should move away from the on-premises version of an app and move to the SaaS platform, because all those problems we talked about around whose responsibility it is, it's not the MSP. All the MSP does now is say, here is your login. We have linked this to Entra SSO and we have secured it. So, in some regards, MSP life got slightly easier. This brings us on to our final section, which is really how Enforcer helps with this challenge. When Enforcer started, fun fact, the IN in Enforcer means Intune, and so the product started by doing policy management of just Intune. This slide is one I show to basically everyone who will listen, which is the attack timeline. And I scraped this from the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture deck, which you can Google. It's just MCRA PowerPoint. There's like 200 slides of all the different Microsoft security capabilities, how they can solve really any problem, and also some theory and thought-provoking stuff on challenging attitudes like technical debt. So in a standard attack, what you might see is the left of the attack happening is all the stuff we can do to prevent it. I would argue that almost every single cyber attack can be prevented with basic controls. And the reason I have that stance is if you look at the news, or you look at Reddit or Discord or Twitter or wherever you get your news from, when you break down what actually happened in these big cyber attacks, it's often the fault of a really basic compromise. Somebody was logged in from another country because it didn't have blocking controls on. The director's account didn't have MFA. Somebody left port 3389 open on a server, or somebody had an Exchange server that wasn't patched. That was a real one in the UK a couple of years ago. Some other ones to call out, like the Disney Slack hack, poor config, the Okta breach, where the identity breach, poor config. It was really not as sophisticated as the news makes out. And it's my belief that the word sophisticated is really used to soften the blow of reality, which is actually, if they had done the basics right, they probably wouldn't have been hacked. So now that Enforcer has built the platform to do the posture management, endpoint security, Entra, Defender Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, all these controls at the left, we now want to make it easier so that Enforcer covers both sides of the attack timeline, where you can come on board with us on the right of Boom, and we can help you detect, respond, and recover, but also inform what you should be doing over here on the left, and I'll touch on that in a minute. How this can work practically in the product. This is an early animation I got. I couldn't find a more recent one. If we're highlighting the issues around access and identity, then the information we can provide is that, well, actually, one of these red lines could have been prevented with a control such as blocking legacy auth, because legacy auth does not support MFA. It's an old protocol, and so you can make a conditional access policy like this one, where we're targeting all users, all resources under these client apps and block. And by the way, just a note on CA policy creation. Broadly, you should be applying all your policies to all users and then working out what the exclusions are. If you start doing it to groups, you're potentially missing people out when new people join, or there's different circumstances in how the account is made. But in this example, what we've done is create the conditional access policy that block the thing. We've put it into our Contoso Inc. baseline. So when we talk about Enforcer, we always recommend and encourage customers to have that baseline tenant. I have then made that in my baseline tenant along with all the other controls I want to support, like Intune, Defender, SharePoint, Teams, Purview, Exchange, M365, and Copilot. And then using Enforcer, I push those configs down to my customers and then track the drift between them. But the initial signal for this now is not coming from having a whole complete baseline. It's coming from day one, because the signal from TDR is telling you that. It then becomes an evergreen effort to go into Enforcer and make sure that if we've got this baseline configured, have we actually deployed this out to all customers and all tenants? This deck was made a few days ago, but today we launched or relaunched the policy, the align by policy feature. So let me see if I can just pop another slide in here a second to show that, because it's quite a good one to call out. So see if I can reload the deck. So now what you can do with Enforcer is look by policy to see if it's missing from a customer tenant, which is really powerful when it comes to identity, right? If we've decided that block legacy authentication, or actually more commonly, you see the one that is you see people buying fish kits online and they use uh, operating systems that are not standard, and so you can make a conditional access policy to block unstandard operating systems. If you see that that would have prevented a cyber attack, now what I can do on the left in Enforcer is pick that policy and see which tenants are missing it, and then push it out en masse to everyone. So it makes it very easy. The takeaway message really is that TDR will protect you on day one, but it informs you forever because you've got those signals coming in. You've got our blueprints and baselines to help you learn what good looks like, and you can go and make those protections. And as you scale up and consolidate with Microsoft, we will continually add more features to the TDR that support Microsoft XDR and all the features that brings as well. So instead of Enforcer kind of being in the middle, you can start on the right with Enforcer now and move yourself to the left and hopefully reduce the boom to it never happening in the first place. And that's all I've got, really. So if there are any questions and answers I can help you with, I'd be keen to get your thoughts on whether you thought that's a helpful message to say. Maggie, I thought there was a poll as well that you were going to put in the chat at some point. Ah, there we go. So if you want to sign up and learn more about what TDR is about or what the core platform can do, then please do give the responses and we'll get in touch. So there's a question in the chat. When is TDR being released to test? Public GA, I believe, is around September. Thanks, John. Yeah, great presentation. I appreciate the historical look. Yeah. I mean, with all that, like, we didn't get to identity by accident. There's a lot of context that takes us to this place. I thought it was important just to give you that recap. Are there any other questions I can help with, or even just technical, general Entra stuff I can help with as well? I'll stay on for a few minutes. Seeing a lot of the results in the poll are saying not right now. Is that because there's an existing solution in place, or is it because it's it's a bad time of the year? What is anyone willing to talk about that? I guess we can follow up later and find out why. Okay, in that case, we'll close this one out. If you've got any other questions, then you can get in contact with us, and we'll be more than happy to answer and give you more information as required. George says, I'm currently looking at Intune security. It's difficult to find a standardization for security. What would you recommend enforcing every tenant? We have our blueprint baselines that you can use within Enforcer. So there's some good templates there around endpoint protection core and advanced. Have you looked at those at all? But my core, like my personal core things on Intune, if I'm looking at security, if I'm a business premium shop, I'm going to be using business premium and Intune and Defender. So making sure that those two products are configured. So does Defender have an antivirus policy? Are we using ASR rules? If we're not using ASR rules today, could we put them in audit mode for a few weeks and then get them to block mode? Because that's really the stuff that prevents a lot of the common exploits. For general Windows security, are we patching? Are we making use of auto patch and hot patch? Have we disabled things like SMBv1? Are we managing browsers? Because browsers are a hot topic at the moment. With, I think the stats are something like 90% of the workload now is done in a browser. Have we had the discussion with our end customers to say that we should limit the number of browsers in use and then make use of all the protections that they have? Like with Edge, for example, it has smart screen, it has typo squat protection, scareware protection, and all that kind of stuff you can have with single sign-on with the Entra ID in the customer tenant for all the apps they use. So I'd be making use of those. Extension management's a big one as well. If someone can blindly download extensions, there's been a lot of stories recently where those extensions are actually malicious. So extension management's a big one. Cool. And you can jump in Discord as well. We've got, if you go to discord.gg/enforcer, you can continue these sorts of chats there. We're always around. Cool. I'll close up the call now. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you again next time.